responsibility to determine infrastructure procurement policy, who should be the last person, which office should be in charge of it, because CIDB has published the standard for procurement, which Ronnie spoke about earlier. You have the Engineering Council, which is a professional body, and the custodian of really the engineering profession in the country. We have the Department of Public Works, which has a political function, which is overarching infrastructure. In fact, CIDB is almost like a subsidiary or a parastatal within Public Works. Then we have a new office now in the presidency of Dr. Ramkhuba, that's looking at infrastructure. It's not necessarily looking at procurement, but they are looking at investment, fundraising and things like that. But it's in the presidency. So I'm saying, where would it be best located? It might be other bodies, because we've just way too many. We have more than 25 organized formations within the built environment. So the responsibility to compile inputs for infrastructure procurement policy, where do you think it would be better placed, and why?
Sibani, this is for you. Who should be the custodian of policy when it comes to infrastructure procurement?
Thank you very much once again for the question. Wow, quite an interesting question. I think Gundo, you mentioned a number of bodies that exist within the built environment profession, infrastructure space. I think there are many options indeed that we have. For me, I would say that the office that would have where the buck should stop per se would probably be
Sibani, we do
that is responsible for the
you can you hear us?
Is it okay?
Yeah, but yeah, I think there was but yeah, carry on. You were still talking about the right office.
Okay, so I think that the National Treasury. Okay, I'm torn between. Okay, is the office of the Chief Procurement Officer, right? Who's supposed to play a role in like an overarching role in the procurement of infrastructure and other goods and services, I would imagine. But also the public procurement bill seeks to put into effect a procurement regulator who's pretty much gonna play a role in regulating procurement. And I think that I've found responsible for some of the confusion that takes place within infrastructure and public procurement is that there are a number of legislation, and there are a number of offices that exist, and sometimes these legislations that exist are at odds with each other, which make it difficult to really facilitate a smooth process of public procurement, considering that this probably is 10 to 13% of the GDP spend. So I think that the National Treasury with the Chief Procurement Officer is where the buck should stop, but with the Council of Built Environment and the CIDB having a role in as far as an expertise or advisory is concerned with regards to infrastructure. I think that for me, with how I look at it, is that the National Treasury is responsible for the budget, and then it makes it the Chief Officer's role. Well, when the act comes through, it will be the procurement regulator who I think will then be responsible for the funding of public procurement in SA. So it is where the buck should really stop, where the money is. And obviously the built environment professionals, through the advisory options, whether a board is set up within the procurement regulator, or the built environment then could contribute in that sense to ensure that the public procurement and infrastructure procurement and delivery management takes place with the proper channels, with the proper knowledge and empowerment from the experts in the field, being those that belong under the councils, under the council of the in a way, in trying to bring context into it. But for me, that's basically it. Within the office of the Chief Procurement Officer, and once the procurement bill is passed, I would be happy if everything is then set through with the...
Okay. Thanks, Ronnie. So Ronnie, do you agree?
Look, I do think that the institutional arrangement as far as infrastructure procurement is too fragmented. The straightforward answer to your question is that I think government actually needs to remove so many different organizations that are involved in as far as infrastructure procurement is concerned. My clear answer to your question is that I think just empower the CIDB more, give it more funding, and obviously if you give it more funding, the assumptions that they will appoint, there will be more capacity to deal with the intricacies that that challenge construction sector procurement in as far as all is concerned. I mean, for example, the Office of Ramaphosa and so forth, look, in as far as long-term infrastructure investment is concerned and dealing with the political impediments that private sector usually would have, I would think that they are best positioned to continue doing that. I don't think the arrangement or maybe the institutional architecture in as far as procurement is concerned needs to be radically overhauled, but I do think that they just need to synchronize existing institution into, at the very least, one or maybe three. For example, the CITB could play a role to enforce and investigate and play the accountability role as a watchdog, which I think I'm happy with. And really, I don't think that the function of the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer, in as far as infrastructure is concerned, look, yes, fine, they're within Treasury and the sorts, and obviously that's the budget and so forth. But from a functional point of view, look, those guys are not doing a good job. You still find variation orders, obscene variation orders, going through directly those guys, but they can't tell what is it that is right and what is wrong in as far as those variation orders are concerned. And they make a lot of allowances for stuff that I in my view, I feel that they're actually not capacitated to do that. So my view is that take the CIDB, take some of the functions that public works, in fact, public works, in as far as construction industry regulation is concerned, they're doing a terrible job. And my view is that they must take some of the they have I think program 3, if you look at their budget structure in the usual annual reports that they have policy and regulations. Obviously under that budget structure, they fund CVE and all IDT and all these other organizations that make up the ecosystem of organizations within the public works space. But in as far as infrastructure procurement, you actually need one person to deal with enforcement. From a policy point of view, look, a policy is just a document that just prescribes what is it that needs to be done in order to achieve certain outcomes. If that policy is agreed upon and there's control over, obviously, who's ultimately the owner of that policy, I mean, that's fine. But look, the reality of the matter here, we have problems, and the problems need to be addressed. And for us to address the problems, we need a much more simpler and less complicated institutional arrangement to deal with those issues. And the best positioned organization to deal with any aspect of infrastructure procurement is the CIDB. They've come up with all the prescripts in as far as infrastructure procurement is concerned. They have all the ideas in as far as all this is concerned. But if you go and look at their annual report right now, in fact, it came out, I think, yesterday. I'm just not done reading it. But the reality of the matter is that they are just not funded well. The scope of their mandate, the budget that they have, and the amount of money they are able to raise annually is just not enough. For example, investigations, with the 50,000 contractors that are registered when they are registered, imagine all, let's say half of those contractors breach any procurement related prescripts that they have, and they need to investigate those guys. Who's going to investigate those guys if they first need to pay salaries, pay rent, pay all these other things that they need to pay for? Or maybe what could mean that they could increase the price in as far as the guys that are registered in the contractors, they could raise money that way. But look, the easier option and a less politically sensitive option here is, look, maybe the chief officer, the chief procurement officer can continue with the other forms of procurement, goods and services, but infrastructure procurement needs to be separated entirely from people who have nothing to do with infrastructure. And the capacity and the policy and the accountability need to be ultimately linked to one person. My view in as far as the procurement regulator is concerned, look, it has to be specific. Infrastructure procurement is not the same as procuring school books, toilet paper, or whatever the case that may be. Is just not the same. You have to procure infrastructure in different ways, introduce even different ways of procuring infrastructure, and the only persons to do those or to be able to advance that kind of new thinking is actually people who will be mostly concerned with construction infrastructure, the regulation of the construction sector. So in as far as infrastructure procurement is concerned, anyone that has a responsibility right now for setting the policy of procurement and so forth, they must be strip away of the policy, centralize it to the CIDB, and then CIDB capacitated with enough resources to deal with the intricacies of national government, local government, municipalities, and SOEs. And obviously in that you can even dissect in these larger SOEs. You can't treat ESCOM the same way as you treat, let's say, for example, Joshco in COJ. I mean, ESCOM procures very, very large type of projects, very complicated type of projects. You have to separate that, deal with them differently, deal with those other guys. But look, for this to work out, the implementation and the enforcement to ensure we get the outcomes that you need to get, you have to have a clear, someone must be clearly responsible for it, and it must not be Ramaphosa. Look, I think Ramaphosa must help us get the money from private sector. I think that's his job, is to interfere with government, convince private sector that his only job is actually to remove the blockages in as far as this is concerned. Okay, and then but government-wise, whether it's local, whatsoever, the enforcement of the CIDB, all the government institutions, I do have slightly differing views in as far as, in fact, some organizations procure for themselves, like municipalities, for example. I do feel like there are some municipalities that really they don't know, they have no clue whatsoever whatever they might need, might be the case. So and maybe the standardization question, as far as you mentioned, Sibani, maybe CIDB can also enforce that, take it up with them, and then the ones that don't know what to do, they don't even decide what is it that they might need. CIDB decides on their behalf. I mean, you can't have a different school in Eastern Cape for 200 million, and you have another same school.
Yeah, we're losing you, Ronnie.
That's my view. So my view is that CIDB must stay most of these organizations.
Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. This can go on the whole night. Gundo, as you can see, we've got solutions there. The industrial solutions, and I mean, for me, it's encouraging to know that the solutions are lying with professionals in the industry and young ones that are coming up have the solutions. So the future is bright, if I may say. Gundo, yeah. In conclusion, I'll give it to you again, Gundo, and we've got 1 minute to go.
Okay, no, thanks, and thanks for the opportunity. This is quite insightful because some of us came from the private sector to the public sector, then to academia, try and consolidate what we have observed on both the sectors. But it's always refreshing to see that there are people who are observing the same things that we were observing while we were still in industry, that they are applying their minds to it. And it's also encouraging to see that they are thinking the same way that one has thought before. We go through the processes where you refine your ideas on things, and for that reason, I would encourage you guys, formalize your knowledge. When we do a master's in infrastructure at UCT in a few years' time, come and register. Let's formalize it. You will find that when you come with your a published paper and say the University of Cape Town has done research and has found this, the government is more amenable to listening to you. So it's another way of putting pressure with using the evidence of systematic research.